Right then, let's do a quick recap. So the starting point of our DIY organizational design framework is the component of processes, which involves a list of key steps across the main activities of process mapping, process optimization, as well as process automation. These activities are dependent on a number of inputs that are essential in the performance of the given activities, leading to key outcomes that will get us closer to our objective of building the operational architecture. Getting to this operational architecture means arriving at the key outputs of defining all required operational components and the associated processes in each component, working out how all of these processes can be optimized and automated, and lastly, outlining the enablement of the given optimized processes. The second component we deal with is people, the subcomponents of which are people structure, roles and responsibilities, as well as skills and competencies. Distilling these subcomponents reveals a process that starts at the collection of information, which entails the researching of industry and market best practices for companies of a similar size, shape, and internal contextual factors, designing the structure of the organization from the overall organizational structure to the last level of the last subfunction of every defined function. This is followed with identifying any headcount optimization opportunities, which is heavily dependent on the process optimization and automation outcomes, defining the skills and competencies per defined role that are required to deliver on the role's mandate, as well as identifying any gaps and outlining plans targeted at filling those gaps. The research on industry and market best practices are an input that then needs to be aligned with internal and external contextual factors that specifically relate to the organization in question. Context is everything. It is the simplest source of value proposition enhancement and unique competitive advantage. It is also where the organization's biggest limitations and weaknesses are heavily pronounced, providing an opportunity to rejig, retune, or even transform towards greater success. Thoroughly aligning this context with best practices should help unearth an organizational design outcome that will best serve the organization in getting it in the best shape to move it forward. Once this process is done, then the top-line overall and functional leadership structures can be defined, followed by defining the rest of the structures below each of the functions and sub-functions, a critical input of which are the technology-dependent optimization and automation opportunities verified at the process mapping stage. Actualizing these optimization and automation opportunities would typically depend on a number of factors, including budget availability, required technology maturity, implementation risks, and so forth, so it may take a duration of time before these can be implemented. One would need to indicate on the structure what roles would be needed in the short term, and what roles would need to be done away with once these automations and technology-dependent optimizations have been implemented, as well as the timing of these role eliminations over time. The next step in this process is to fully define the responsibilities of each role, along with the skills and competencies required to actually deliver on the outlined responsibilities. The process of filling the roles on the new structure then begins with looking at the current structure of the organization and identifying which employees can fill those roles, which employees would need to be upskilled or cross-skilled to fill certain roles, and what roles would need to be recruited for. If there's a headcount cost element to the objectives of this activity, which, let's face it, is often the main and sometimes the only objective of this exercise, then the cost of each employee comes into play. An employee who earns a large salary due to tenure might be suited for a role in the new structure, but this employee's extensive experience might be more geared towards doing things in the not-so-data-driven way. Furthermore, upskilling this employee might prove difficult due to natural resistance to change, because the new way of doing things might mean that this employee loses the leverage they've always had in doing things the old way. It might therefore be more prudent to rather replace this employee with someone less expensive, with more current skills and qualifications, whose lesser experience is only built around doing things digitally, in a fully data-driven way. The next step involves identifying any gaps related to roles, skills, and competencies, which would then necessitate plans that relate to filling these gaps, along with plans of other activities that are required to wrap up the process, including exiting plans for redundant employees, as well as recruitment plans for filling of roles. As with processes, this exercise is performed with a distillation from the corporate level to each function, then sub-function, with the core objectives of each function and sub-function as the guiding input. As stated before, it's people that perform the processes that make up the operational model of the organization. The manner in which these processes need to be performed dictates the kind of people, professionally that are required to perform them, how they need to be organized in doing so, as well as guiding suggestions, from a policy and procedures perspective, on how reporting lines should be staggered. The list of actors across processes particularly is a key input to the organizational structure design. These inputs would then allow the performance of activities required to arrive at the required optimized and contextualized organizational structure, with the key outputs being the defined leadership structure, the design of the functional breakdown of the structure, the roles and responsibilities required to populate the structure across the organization, as well as cross-skilling, upskilling, recruitment and exit process plans that would then make up the close-off of this exercise. This would lead to arriving at the organizational structure required to fulfill the mission of firstly, rotating the organization to becoming fully data-driven, as well as getting it in the best shape to move forward.